Hello and welcome. My name is Amy Jordan, President of Hudson Community Foundation. I'm proud to serve as host for this State of Giving 2022 webinar. Our panel experts will discuss the state of charitable giving this year and share with you tools and techniques for helping the charitably inclined plan their philanthropy. As we move through the webinar and you have questions for our panelists, since this is a webinar, you are muted and your video is off. Please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen and we will get to questions later in the program. If your question is intended for a specific member of our distinguished panel, please indicate so. This program is being recorded for replay later. Lastly, as we mentioned in the invitation, this webinar is eligible for CFP credit. To receive the credit, we put a short survey in the chat at the end of the program. Advisors will need to fill in their name and CFP ID to receive the credit. Now, let's get started. I'd like to introduce our panelists. Today, joining us are highly knowledgeable experts on financial investment, estate planning, tax law, nonprofit, and charitable giving. Nick Centineo, Senior Investment Consultant with Manning & Napier since 2006, and his primary responsibilities include providing analytic support to institutional clients in the areas of objective setting, cash flow analysis, asset allocation, and fundraising consulting. He leads the firm's endowment and foundation service team and is a frequent contributor to the firm's communication and thought leadership in the nonprofit space. Nick earned his Bachelor of Science in Business from the State University of New York at Geneseo. He is a CFA charter holder and a CIPM certificate. Next, we have Kyle Ryan. He's a senior financial consultant at Manning & Napier. He is responsible for coordinating all aspects of client relationships and has over 20 years of experience in the financial industry. Prior to joining Manning & Napier in 2006, Kyle was the Director of Client Services and Sales at Rigger and Stern Capital Management, LLC, and a financial advisor with Merrill Lynch. He earned his BSBA in Finance and Banking from the University of Missouri-Columbia. He's involved with various nonprofit organizations in his community, and he currently holds Series 6, 63, 65, and 66 licenses. Next, we have Matt Hostetler. He's partner in the boutique trust and estates firm David J. Simmons and Associates, LLC. His practice serves wealthy families, family offices, and private trust companies, and he works with clients across the United States. Matt is a member of the Ohio and Florida bars, is a certified specialist in estate planning, trust, and probate law, and writes and speaks on various tax and trust and estate matters. He received his LLM from the University of Miami Heckerling Graduate Program in Estate Planning, where he was first in his class. He received his Juris Doctorate Magna Cum Laude from the University of Toledo College of Law, where he was elected to the Order of the Coif and served on the executive board of the Law Review. And next we have Tom Judge. Tom is a partner with JLP CPAs in their Hudson office. He has 30 years experience advising privately held businesses and high net worth individuals on how to best maximize their tax savings and wealth management. He has found the best way to help clients come from collaborating with their advisors to develop a plan for their clients' short and long-term goals. Tom and his family live in Hudson and enjoy being a part of the community and giving back where possible. So Nick, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Amy. Thanks for that introduction too. I think the first question we wanted to cover was this one: how has philanthropy really changed over the last few years? And to answer that, I turned to Giving USA as sort of a high level overview. They put out information on the overall level of giving each year. And actually, the timing of this webinar is really perfect because the 2021 numbers were just released this week. So from that, Americans gave $485 billion to charity in 2021, which is an all-time record, building on the previous all-time record of last year. So despite the pandemic, giving has really grown. And, in my experience, the gains have really not been necessarily evenly distributed. Some charitable organizations that I talk to are struggling, frankly. Others are doing very well, but in aggregate, I think donors have stepped up to the challenge of the pandemic and supported nonprofits that are important to them. And so that's been great news. The other notable thing that I think that's changed, I think, is that the focus on what some philanthropists are trying to accomplish has changed a bit in the past few years. And one buzzword that gets thrown around a lot is strategic philanthropy, where donors really are trying to put a business mindset on solving a problem, having your own personal mission and working closely with different nonprofits to try to accomplish that mission. So I suppose what I see is kind of a subset of that. In my experience, donors are much more focused on the long term today and sort of the idea of sustainability. I think I think that manifests itself sort of in renewed emphasis on things like endowed giving. And that's probably stemming from what's happened in the pandemic, because donors are seeing just how fragile some organizations really are, and how they can benefit from having sort of like another source of income to diversify their revenue via an endowment, let's say. So this focus on the long term, I think, is really I think it's really been a welcome development for a lot of organizations, but of course it's also been a challenge too. It's a challenge sometimes to accept and administer endowed gifts and really cultivate those types of gifts going forward. But it does seem like there's an opportunity there, and that's only grown in the last few years. And as a result, you do see a lot of interest in something like community foundations, because they do provide a pretty simple way, I think, for a lot of donors to be strategic, for a lot of donors to focus on sustainability in the long term and just focus on the things that really matter the most to them. And so that's probably a good segue, Kyle, over to you and into the next question. We talked a little bit about how philanthropy has changed. I'm wondering, since you're sort of on the front lines of donors' finances and financial decisions overall, what do you think is the state of charitable giving and the state of donor confidence today that you see?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Nick, and a great start to the program. So if you can flip to the next page, when we're looking at the donor confidence today in donating to charities, one of the biggest things we have to look at is how the market's really done. If we were looking through the end of last year, the S&P 500 actually had one of its best all-time trailing 3-year, 5-year, and 10-year periods of time. That's tremendous. Now, of course, if you stopped it right there, everything would feel pretty good. It's one of the reasons we probably saw some record donations to various charities in 2021. But even now with the market declines, we're still at some of the best times in history for investing in the S&P over that 5 and 10-year period. So it's really, the market downturn has taken off the last year and a half worth of market returns, but it has not reversed the last 5 or 10 years of really stellar market returns. In addition, though, people's wealth has increased, not just from the stock market, but also from rising home prices and other rising asset values. And in fact, the St. Louis Federal Reserve issues a report every year. As of March 31, it indicated that the household net worth today is about $141 trillion. That's with a T, trillion dollars. In 2019, it was $110 trillion. It's about a 28% increase in household net worth in just a couple of years. It's a tremendous amount of growth. So people should be feeling pretty good about things at this point in time. However, that's not necessarily the way everyone feels today, because inflation today, if you saw the latest numbers, were about 8.6% inflation came out earlier this month. It's a number we haven't seen since the early 1980s. Some of the people on this call might not have even been born when we hit inflation at that rate in the past. So to combat inflation, what the Federal Reserve is doing is trying to raise interest rates and attempting to decrease the money supply. This combination, though, has really increased fears of a looming recession. It's affecting the consumer confidence and the confidence of even very high net worth individuals. Who I had a meeting, earlier this week, and an individual said, "Well, I'm not making any more charitable donations this year." And so, this is somebody who historically has always given substantial amounts to various charities. So people are a little bit more concerned about the market environment that we're in, even if they're high net worth individuals. In this environment, though, one of the things we have to, understand is, that, donors, needs to understand, the benefits of donating to your charity versus another charity. So is it actually going to accomplish the things that I want to have done, when I give money away to a group? And is it the best one that I can give it to? Because if I need to cut one out, you don't want it to be your charity. In addition, though, they need to, the donor has to feel secure that the amount of money that they're going to be giving away is not going to impact the realization of all their other goals or the goals of their family. We and other financial consultants, work with our clients in, ways to develop financial plans to show them the ability to, to still achieve their goals, as well as really meet the needs of those charities that they really do care about. So part of that is, of course, going to be from providing confidence in the investment returns, through proper diversification of the portfolio, allocation of the portfolio that's going to allow us to both, protect during market declines what we're currently facing, as well as take advantage of the next leg up in the growth, so they can see that they're able to actually achieve this over their long-term horizons as well as that of their family. But additional ways that we can do it to really help the process and help our donors, help our clients and the prospective donors, is letting them know about some advantages that they can utilize to minimize the taxes that they're doing, or take advantage of other charitable giving strategies like qualified charitable distributions, planned gifts, or donating of highly appreciated stock. I know some of you might be thinking there's no stocks that are still above your buy price right now, but there's a few out there, and we have them in a lot of our clients' portfolios. So we are still finding opportunities you can give donated highly appreciated stock, and of course, utilizing things like donor advised funds. All of which, we're going to talk a little bit more about later today. Certainly, we can have more in-depth questions at the end of the presentation as well. But at the end of what we really want to do is make sure our clients are understanding that they can both achieve their lifestyle goals, their estate goals, and their charitable goals, and do it at the most efficient way possible. If anyone does want to talk more about the stock markets, the economies, and strategies, I'm more than happy to talk at the end of the webinar. But in the meantime, I want to turn it over to Nick. Did you have anything to add on this, or on the next slide?
No, yeah, if you go to the next slide, Amy, I just sort of, where I come from in my background is working directly with nonprofits themselves. So I sort of like to see myself as a conduit between, communicating between what the donor expects and what a nonprofit needs to be successful. And that's really where this question comes from. What are the challenges the nonprofits are facing today? And then how are philanthropists in a position to help them? In my experience, capacity continues to be probably the number one issue. Every organization is different, but again, in aggregate, I think most nonprofits are finding that there is a greater need for their services today than there was this a few years ago. Anecdotally, basic needs types of organizations have seen the greatest increase in demand. I think that's due to it might be due to some government services being pulled back, maybe in conjunction with the uncertainty of the pandemic. Plus, you got what Kyle was talking about, things like rising costs for food and labor. That just means that budgets don't go as far. And I think this is where donors can have a really direct impact in gifts that are designed to increase capacity, hire more people, buy more food, build more housing, what have you. Another challenge to nonprofits is how they engage with donors. So before the pandemic, there were a lot of different avenues for engagement. You had events, you had volunteering, you had personal meetings, one-on-one meetings. In-person opportunities made it a lot easier, I think, to give donors personal attention and to really build a relationship with them over time. It's been much more difficult to do that over the last 2 years. Events have come back, but we're really not at the same level that we were before. And virtual engagement, I think, just can be kind of tough to replicate that. It's also still a bit of a weird time because no one really knows what's going to be socially acceptable or how many people are going to show up if you do have an in-person event. And so a lot of organizations are diversifying how they do their reach out. They're doing phone calls, emails, they're doing a lot on social media, but they are also holding events, and maybe those are both in-person and virtual events. But the bottom line really remains that engagement is a challenge. We're really not at the same level we were at 2 years ago, and it's hard to get people's attention. And so for donors, I'd suggest just being as open as you can be. There are organizations out there who would love to get to know you better. Being outgoing and sort of showing an interest, whether that's in person or virtually, that goes a long way towards enabling that sharing of information, again, which benefits both nonprofits and philanthropists. And so nonprofit organizations can communicate what they need from their supporters, and then donors can communicate what they want to achieve in terms of their philanthropy. So it's really important to get that engagement going. And then one more challenge I did want to talk about is it's a challenge, but also an opportunity. And I sort of mentioned this before, but it's planned giving and endowed giving. So to me, there's a lot of tailwinds to these types of gifts. And you have donors, sort of like what Kyle was talking about. You have many donors that are ahead of their financial plans, despite the recent market pullback, based on how good the market's been over the past 10 years. You have a population that's getting older, and people who are in very much an estate planning mood today because they are getting older. And then you do have a lot more knowledge about the different options that are available out there to make planned gifts and the benefits that they can provide. So the challenge for many nonprofits, I think, is facilitating all this, especially for smaller nonprofits who maybe don't already have a large endowment, maybe don't really have the infrastructure to pursue or ask for gifts. Some organizations see this opportunity as sort of an investment they'll have to make. They'll have to spend money now and with the hope that they'll pay off in years ahead. But it is hard to get the ball rolling when, again, you're a small organization or maybe your board isn't as involved as it can be. I think many philanthropists are stepping up and being more active in these types of gifts. Maybe they're the ones reaching out and asking for where they can make it the most difference today. Or they're saying, use me as an example to encourage other donors. There's been a lot of chatter today about campaigns and whether now's a good time to have one. That's an opportunity for some philanthropists to be a lead donor in a campaign, and organizations can build a campaign around that type of lead donor if a gift is large enough. Some donors will structure their gift as a matching gift. And I mean, there's stories out there of large gifts that are contingent on organizations finding other donors to match that amount. Otherwise, they get nothing. And so that's a great jumpstart to a campaign too. And so I guess the bottom line is that there's these challenges out there that the nonprofits are facing. Some of it is a challenge of information and a challenge of communication. But there's a lot that philanthropists can do if they know this, to position themselves to be helpful and to position themselves to do good, and while at the same time, meeting their own charitable goals and financial goals. So that's really where I see things today as far as the challenges, which is probably a good. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, then once donors decide they want to step up, and they've got to make some decisions about what the best way is to actually make that gift. And so if we can go to the next slide, this is going to go into what some of their options are. The easiest thing for a donor to do is to give cash, right? And that can either be a cash gift now, it can be a cash gift into your will or trust that takes effect at your death. And that's great for donors because it's a clear amount. It's easy to value. Donor can do anything they want with it. donees can do anything they want with it. It has a lot of flexibility. And the big downside to a cash gift now for donors is inflation, right? We've talked about inflation a little bit, and things are a little uncertain now. We've got high inflation, highest in decades, and so some donors are going to be hesitant about giving because of the inflation. Well, there are ways to give cash that's still, it doesn't have the restrictions for the donee charity, can also benefit the donor. And I think one of the most common ones and one of the most attractive ones now is a charitable remainder trust, and especially the charitable remainder unit trust. We call it a CRUT, C-R-U-T. And a split interest gift, such as a CRUT, is where there's a charitable component and then there's a component that benefits the donor. And so the way CRUT works is a donor would transfer an amount of money, and it can be cash or appreciated stock or whatever, and it goes to an irrevocable trust. And as long as the donor is living, or for a term of years, or you can even structure it for a couple different lives, like a donor and spouse, it will pay a percentage of that value back to the donor. And the value it pays back is determined based on a certain interest rate. So, right now the interest rates are climbing. We've seen high interest rates, and so that works out very well now. And it also provides a hedge against inflation. So, when somebody's hesitant about giving because they're concerned that maybe inflation is going to dilute their asset and going to impair their ability to support themselves, a CRUT is a great solution, because if inflation increases values of assets, then they're going to get more money from their trust. They're going to get more money back, and it's not going to affect their charitable deduction. That's all determined the first year based on these rates currently. But it does provide them with protection and with ongoing income. So, this can work well for cash, people with appreciated assets, even things you think of like farms. This can work well for that. If you have a low basis farm asset, we all know that land has increased in value significantly. And it can be tough to take that capital gain hit, but you can do a workaround with the charitable remainder trust and turn it into income for you to live on in retirement, if that works, if that's one of your goals are. Another thing is, as opposed to giving cash directly, you can give a private foundation. And donors like this because it gives them the most control over where their money is ultimately going to be going. And so a private foundation isn't giving directly to the charity, it's giving to an entity that the donor creates. And it has a lot of restrictions, but it provides a lot of control. So the donors get to select how the money is invested, who serves on the board, ultimately where the assets will be distributed. But federal tax law imposes lots of restrictions because they don't want this to be a vehicle for abuse. So it's not as beneficial in a lot of ways from, compared to a public charity like a community foundation, because donor doesn't have as beneficial, they can't deduct as much of their annual income every year, and they have to distribute certain amounts each year from the private foundation. So while it has the most control, there are some significant downsides that should be weighed against. In addition, there's also the cost of compliance. So to comply with all those federal restrictions, you've got to have a lot of good record keeping, file tax returns every year. There's cost for investment and legal services to support the private foundation. But in the recent years, the private foundations haven't been quite as compelling because of organizations like Hudson Community Foundation and other community foundations. But community foundations now offer what are called donor advised funds. And donor advised funds offer a lot of the attractive elements of a private foundation, out the overhead and compliance requirements that you'll have from the private foundation. So it's really a really optimal compromise, especially if you're giving less than several $1,000,000, and if you don't feel the need to control every last aspect of the administration. So what you get from a donor advised fund is you get the ability to recommend to the foundation where the money is going to go. I say recommend because ultimately it depends on the foundation's directors to make the final determination. But in my experience, it's I don't think I've ever seen a donor recommendation not followed, but it does ultimately depend on the foundation's board of directors to approve the distribution. But where there are more strict limits on deductibility of contributions to a private foundation, since a community foundation is a public charity, you can deduct a much higher percentage of your income, 50% of your income every year as opposed to 35. And donor advised funds don't have a federally mandated distribution requirement every year. So where private foundations have to distribute 5% of their assets each year, a donor advised fund, there's no federal requirement for that. Different foundations may have their own requirements for that, but there's nothing federally regulated. But maybe well, those are all really good things. One other phenomenal aspect is you don't have to deal with any of the compliance overhead, the headaches. You don't have to worry about filing its return for it. You don't have to worry about hiring your lawyer to make sure that the annual meeting minutes are all followed. The foundation just takes care of that for you, and you just tell them where the money is going to go, and your investment advisor can tell them how the money is going to be invested. It's a really optimal solution, and one that donors should consider in the current environment.
Could I add one note to that? Is it because it was
Absolutely.
excellent, Matt? But also another comment that I received from donors when they've had the choice to either open a private foundation or they have opened a private foundation and then transferred it to the foundation, Hudson Community Foundation, to open their DAP, is that they now have anonymity. They no longer have to report a separate 990 that shows all of their gifting and their distributions. If that falls under the community foundation's 990, being, as Matt said, we're a public charity. So they then have anonymity and others don't know where they are granting and gifting to.
Excellent point. And also worth noting that if someone tries a private foundation and decides it's too much work, they can, as Amy alluded to, close it down and transfer it into a donor advised fund and eliminate headaches.
I will also mention one of the great things about Hudson Community Foundation is their ability to work with clients on a variety of sizes, $2,000 up to $2 million or $10 million. So they have that ability to do that. If you're using them, they also take off the burden of doing the research on your various charities, where you can ask them to do the research and find a great charity that is supporting children that want to go to college, or under our healthcare initiatives in the Hudson area or in Cleveland, etc. So you can look at those and lean on them for doing a lot of that research for you, and you just get to have the fun of going out and doing, giving the money away. But the final thing is they're one of the few community foundations, even at that smaller size, that can continue to keep your investment structure the way it has been in the past. So you can continue to use your financial advisor or keep the stocks that you're donating into the portfolio if you think they're appropriate for the goals of that charity. So there's a lot of flexibility and ability to do those things, and they make that available. So it's a nice thing for Hudson Community Foundation, their ability to provide that to you. But if everyone's done with this slide, Amy, if you want to move to the next slide. Recent tax law changes. We know these changes happen all the time. The question is what's that mean for my ability to give, donate, help the charities that I want to help? The first thing is the easiest way to give money to a charity continues, as Matt mentioned, give cash. It's very easy. You write a check and they cash that check. It's the nicest, easiest way to do it. But there's other ways it might actually be more tax advantage to you. Donating highly appreciated assets, whether they be stocks or land or something else, may be a way to avoid the capital gains that you would realize on selling those stocks, and therefore minimizing the taxes and allowing you to give more to charity for the same impact to your family. In addition, though, donors may want to group their donations. When we look at the current tax laws, a lot of people don't have an advantage to donate if they're only giving $5,000 or $10,000 a year, which is a lot of money, don't get me wrong. But most people today have a $24,000 exemption as a married couple, and you're capped at state and local taxes at only $10,000. There's a large percentage of the country that just will not, be able to go above that $24,000 amount. Essentially, what grouping a donation is you take 3 or 5 years worth of donations, put them together in one tax year, and you give it to the charity. The charity can then, apply that over the next 5 years for any gift, charity counting purposes or recognition boards or other things of that sort. But you get the tax advantage this year. You also are able to, help that charity that you want to over the next 5 years. The nice thing about that is you can give that as either highly appreciated stock as well. So you can donate the highly appreciated stock or the highly appreciated land to count as your multiple years worth of gifts, kind of grouping those donations together.
And a donor advised fund is the great receptacle for that.
Yep, and that was actually going to be my next point, was a donor advised fund allows you to do that over a period of years, giving to the charities that you want to. So you don't necessarily have to make the decision, what charities do you care about 5 years from now? You can make it the donation to that charity today, to the donor advised fund today, and decide on those charities over the next 5 years. One word of caution, though, is if you do give to, I happen to be Catholic. I know when I give to the Catholic charities, the nuns will still call me 6 weeks later to ask for another donation. Just a word of warning. They're very good at that, but we love them for it. So, but another thing a lot of clients are also using, is qualified charitable donations from their IRA account. So if you're over age 70 and a half, you can make a qualified charitable distribution of up to $100,000 per year from your IRA, as long as it goes directly to a charity. A Hudson Community Foundation does qualify as that type of a charity. However, a donor advised fund does not qualify as a 501c3 charity. So Amy can talk to you about different ways that you can do that. They have other ways to help you in that regard. That's something that you want to do, but it cannot go directly into your 529 plan. So that's one thing just to keep in mind. The benefit, though, is it's not going to give you a tax break this year. What it's going to do is make it so it doesn't show you having earned that income during that calendar year. So it's going to actually just remove it, which actually for a lot of people, that's a better option, because once again, we're not going to hit that $24,000 donation level, which would allow them to itemize or benefit them from itemizing on their tax returns. One additional thing just to keep in mind is you cannot do a qualified charitable distribution from a 401k plan. It has to come out of an IRA account, or a Roth IRA, but no one's going to do it out of a Roth IRA. But so it has to come out of a IRA, not a employer plan like a 401k plan. So those are just some ways that you can minimize the taxes and maximize the benefit to doing it. Matt, I know you've got some ideas around, naming charities as the beneficiaries of IRAs, or possibly even naming a charitable remainder trust as the beneficiary of the IRA, and how that may be advantage to them and their families going forward.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons that qualified charitable distributions are more attractive now than ever before is the Secure Act really it limited the amount of time that a beneficiary can withdraw assets from an inherited IRA. So beneficiaries used to be able to withdraw it over their lifetimes, their remaining life expectancy, but now it's limited to 10 years. And so if you have most people, I think the crossover point is, for 10 years being longer than life expectancy is somewhere in the late 70s, early 80s. For most of the people, this is a far worse solution. So if you're inclined anyway, give your beneficiaries non-qualified assets and give the charities your qualified assets. Give them assets from your IRAs that are going to be taxed as ordinary income to your beneficiaries. Now, I talked about how the Secure Act imposed a 10-year limitation on distributions from qualified plans. That's true in most cases, but there's one exception to that. And so Kyle mentioned the charitable remainder unit trust as a vehicle here that's beneficial. We've done before is named a qualified or a charitable remainder unit trust, like a CRUT, as the beneficiary of an IRA or 401k. And what that lets you do is it's treated like any other CRUT as opposed to an inherited IRA. And so it lets you draft the trust to make distributions over the beneficiary's life expectancy. So you're not limited to the 10-year limitation like you are in the Secure Act. The footnote, the caveat with that is it's not all going to go to the beneficiary, because the charitable remainder part of that is key, because when your beneficiary dies, the remainder, whatever's left in that CRUT, is going to go to the charity. So, and that may be fine. It's certainly going to be probably, depending on tax rates, better from a tax perspective, have a less tax liability than having your beneficiary take it out over 10 years. But then you can go with it too, for mankind, for your community, once the beneficiary passes away. So that's a nice option we've used, and that's particularly attractive to people who have really large IRAs. It is expensive to set up, so a couple $100,000 IRA isn't really great for this. It's going to be your larger ones that are the better fit for this type of strategy. But it is a workaround. It is a nice when you crunch the numbers.
I think the next slide. So I think, Nick, you were going to start off on this one, weren't you?
Sorry. Yeah, so if
Sorry, or maybe this was Tom. Sorry, Tom and Matt.
well, I can kick things off sort of on my opinion on, and I mean, the question is sort of, how do families come together when you talk about philanthropy, and sort of what role can you in the audience, maybe if you're an advisor, what role do you play in sort of facilitating that? I'm a very process-oriented person personally, so I think it behooves us to have a really well thought out process for how to make it, how to make a decision about how to incorporate your families. But the number one thing that I think most families are doing today is getting their kids or their grandkids involved early in helping to make decisions. There's the story that I think many people have, because it's a common situation. I think many people have stories about letting grandkids or kids make decisions about where to give assets out of a donor advised fund or a private foundation, where to make those grants. You sit around the Thanksgiving table, you have your kids or grandkids do the research on, what is this organization doing? What will they do with my money? And you have them come and do a presentation on why they think it's a worthwhile organization to give money to. I think it's a great way, a great practical way to get your family involved on some of these decisions.
And it also helps to jumpstart the conversation about what are your family's values and how are those going to play into the decision on where the money goes from the donor advised fund. I think it also helps families, whether it's grandparents or parents, think more intentionally about what they want to pass on to their children besides money. A legacy is more than just what's left over when mom and dad pass away. It's the family values. Is it religious values, community values, philanthropic values. And a lot of those are very strongly held. And what I found, a lot of times they can be, they're not made explicit by your generations. They rely on the children, grandchildren to observe them, or maybe worse yet, to intuit them, just from proximity to the senior generations. And that works okay sometimes, but what I've seen is it's far better when families are explicit and talk about not just what the values are, but why they hold the values and how those values will practically apply to actions in their lives. And so I love this strategy that Thanksgiving philanthropic strategy for the way it engages family value proactively, multiple generations proactively, and has a tangible result in making distributions to organizations that embody those values that for the family mission. So I think it's critical to do this, and it's also just a great tool to have that conversation.
There is one more story, and it sort of stems from, again, my experience working with schools, hospitals, human service organizations, things like that. Many more organizations are being much more open to, when they are having conversations with donors or potential donors, saying, invite your family. Because if you're giving me a bequest, I'm going to want to acknowledge that, thank you for that, and steward you over time for that gift. Invite you to my events that I have as an organization, and it benefits organizations to include your family in those types of conversations, because it just sort of perpetuates what organizations can get as a benefit from your gift. Clearly a school or a hospital is important to you as a donor, and your family can acknowledge that. An organization should, and we recommend that they do, continue to acknowledge that with someone's kids or grandkids, because that's just going to help further that relationship, deepen that relationship, and it's stewardship of that relationship over time, so that it passes from generation to generation. So if that's not something that different organizations that you're talking to aren't already doing, maybe you can suggest that they do that, because I think that's a great way to have your entire family be involved in your philanthropic decisions.
Yeah, they should do it for their own good and for their donors' good. Really,
Yes.
That's shared mission there.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say it also demonstrates to the client that the advisor is interested in them and not just interested in managing the assets? Truly interested in their whole life, and it also increases their exposure to their spouse, their children, and they're more likely to remain as clients with that wealth advisor in building this family philanthropy. Yeah,
there's a parallel between professional fundraisers and financial advisors and attorneys and CPAs and everyone who is a professional advisor of some sort. We all have got to be good networkers. And if you are, you find ways to be introduced to people's families and cultivate those relationships over time. And when you talk about philanthropy, that's a great way to enable that.
So I think I was going to be starting off here. So, when we're looking at, how to contrast, giving in perpetuity versus, giving during one's lifetime, giving, during your lifetime allows you to really see how that money's going to be spent, how that's going to be used to affect other people's lives, so what we're really looking for in that is it's a nice way that you can give money today. You can see it being used. You can make sure it's being used for what you were thinking it was going to be used for, and possibly get your family involved in giving to that next generation as well. It's a very nice way to do that. So I like giving while we're alive, just the same way I encourage a lot of my clients to spend their money on their kids and their family while they're alive, even if they're just giving it to them to make sure the kids have it. It's sometimes that's the best estate planning tool, is to give the money away to the next generation. You can see it being used. You can enjoy the time with them, as opposed to waiting till you pass away and the kids are possibly in their 60s at that point in time. So, that's one of the things. The other thing is that gives you a lot more control over how those dollars are used, or the purpose of, the organization hasn't changed. A lot of times what we see is we've given money to an organization, 10 years later, the values of that organization may not be what you originally started with. So, having some flexibility in there, I think, is important. Or sometimes it's just that they solved what the organization was for. There used to be a lot of money given to the, finding a cure for polio. There's not a lot of need for polio cures today, but that money can be used for other things. So having some flexibility in how that money is going to be used, I think, is important. One of the nice thing about, giving like a donor advised fund, you can make those changes into the future. If you do give directly to an organization, make sure that you've built in some ability to make adjustments to that in the future. I've got a church and they had a lot of things in there. The church has been around over 120 years and they had a lot of things built in. People gave money 100 years ago for, maintenance of the horse barn and things like that. Just don't make a lot of sense in a city complex anymore. So with that being said, just make sure you have some flexibility if you're going to give it to them after you've passed away. That said, though, giving via your estate might be a nice way that a donor can feel very comfortable that they've been able to achieve all of their goals while still including a very nice amount that goes to a charity, after they no longer need those dollars. So that is a huge benefit of using it as an estate planning tool. And I know I sound like a broken record, but I think it really comes down to you need to create a financial plan. What is your ability to give now versus giving later? Giving in your estate, involves a lot of proper planning, working with Matt or your estate planning attorney. Because remember, once you've passed away, you can no longer change that will, that trust, or that estate plan. So it's important to get it right first. And then also giving during your lifetime, though, it may actually take more planning, because if you're trying to make certain that you've given away your last dollar, and you're essentially broke when you've passed away, we may want to update your estate plan very frequently to adjust for the changing market conditions, tax laws, gift laws, all the other factors that you want to factor into that to make certain that you're not going to run out of money before you no longer need it. But those are some of the things to look at. I know Matt and Todd, you might have some additional things to add to this as well.
I had just add one point to build off of what you were saying, Kyle. That's a good point, because there's giving away during your lifetime, and there's giving away money after you pass away, but not in perpetuity. And then there's giving for the purpose of perpetuity. There's intending to have that money last forever. My suggestion to the advisors on this call is to really ask two important questions. And one would be, what is the mission of the nonprofit that you want to support? Understand clearly what that mission is and how it can best be supported. And then align that with the question of what kind of support would best lend itself to helping that mission. Because you sort of hit the examples already, but something like a school lends itself to perpetual support, right? It intends to be around for forever. And something like a scholarship fund would serve that purpose of achieving generational equity, helping today's generation, helping tomorrow's generation, and so forth. Something like the American Cancer Society doesn't lend itself as much to financial support. And so if that's your intended target, your intended recipient, you have to acknowledge that in the types of gifts that you're structuring.
I think we can probably move to the next slide.
Yeah.
Because my comment really ties into the next one. We talked about flexibility and building in the flexibility when there's especially like a long time horizon, and it's difficult for people to think about perpetuity, think about forever, and they think they're thinking long enough, but they're usually not. And it really is important to find the change circumstances. And someone's going to have to make decisions if there's a change of circumstances, if that college closes or merges, or if they cure cancer, what happens to that perpetual gift then? And so that's all the more reason to really be intentional about communicating values, your personal and family values. And when you're intentional about communicating that to future generations, then you can have the confidence that even if there are changes, even if you're, if there's another pandemic and things go crazy and we don't expect, all these new events, you can still have the confidence that your descendants will make adjustments in a way that would be faithful to your original purpose, values. And so that's, I think, so critical when planning for the long term. Like Nick said, for engaging them, don't just focus on the values, but also focus on like the tangible skills. Make those grandkids, make those kids research charities, figure out how their dollars are going to be most effective. Giving away, it doesn't mean there's no accountability. There's a difference between giving to an effective charity and an ineffective charity, and teach them to know the difference between the two. And there are tangible skills that go with that that I think are really important to communicate.
So for those advisors who have clients that come to you and say, I would love to build a charitable plan, where do you start? So again, being a very process-oriented person, I've tried to come up with some questions to have on hand for those types of situations. And so questions like, what is truly important to you? And what do you value as an individual? What are your experiences that shape your interests in a cause that you want to support? Is there a personal connection to this cause that you want to support? Where should you focus your giving? And some good options would be maybe on the greatest need, maybe on a specific geographic region, maybe on an overlooked area. And what does the charity or nonprofit that you intend to support, what do they actually need? And so you as an advisor can maybe get them in touch with that charity. But just facilitating these questions, I think, is a great way I think it's square one, a great way to start. And ultimately it's a philanthropist's decision. And Kyle mentioned this before, but building that into a financial plan in terms of like having actually a designated goal for giving away money and how you're going to do it, that's pretty crucial also, because you want to be able to account for the range of different possibilities that are out there in the future. Certainly there's a range of different inflation possibilities that are out there right now. That's going to play a role in many people's financial plans. But investment returns, there's a range of different outcomes, and it'd be great to be able to show clients the different outcomes under different circumstances.
I think we've really covered most of the major things I want to cover in at least on this slide. I know that there's some questions we had in the box, so I want to make sure that we have time to get to those as well. Kind of as a quick start off, and at least answer part of that, one of those questions is starting a philanthropy. I think it's always important to make sure you understand the organization, who you're donating to, what they're going to be most affected by, how that you can help them the most. So I think getting involved, getting active in them, whether it's volunteering at the organization or talking with them on a regular basis, attending some of their events, may be a way to understand their needs a little bit better. And of course, you can always work with Amy Jordan about ways that they can do some research for you as to what's really most needed in those types of organizations. If you haven't taken that step where the organizations you want to give to, I think using a donor advised fund can be another nice option. If you want to give that money today, you can put that in and then distribute that over the future. One of the questions was, in the chat that I did notice was, if you give money into donor advised fund, do you only and you want that to last in perpetuity, which a lot of us do. We want it to be multiple generations giving through that organization. Under current law, that's still allowed. There is a potential that's going to be changing in the future, but that's not yet the law. So I think anything you establish today would be under the current rules. With that being said, though, if you want to last in perpetuity, we manage a lot of endowments and foundations. Endowments, by their nature, are set up for, investing in perpetuity. We work with them on setting their asset liability structure to meet their spending policy needs. And that's really what you're looking at as a donor advised fund. If you want to last in perpetuity, is just a smaller endowment. And we would work with you in the same way, develop your, spending policy, and then also your asset allocation to make certain that we can maintain that distribution over an extended period of time. Usually may build in some flexibility to the percentages, but most organizations, the reason you want an endowment or a donor advised fund is you want to give a certain amount of money to that charity every year or to a variety of charities every year. And this is a way that you can put that money in, have that continue to be maintained in a strategy that you feel comfortable you could give 4 or 5% of the portfolio value away every year and not have it affect the long-term viability or the perpetuity of that particular fund. Certainly, working with Amy about that. If you have questions, opening a donor advised fund, she can help you with that. Myself, Nick are very well versed in that as well. We don't actually sponsor donor advised funds, but we work with organizations that do, so we can work with you and help you understand some of the complexities and reasons around that. And as we mentioned, there's ways that you can donate to most take advantage of the tax advantages to do that as well. So with that being said, Amy, did you have anything to add?
No, just keep in mind that to all advisors that the DAF is the fastest growing charitable vehicle, easy to set up. With Hudson Community Foundation, you keep those assets under your management. You can open the charitable investment account on your platform. And for your client, it's one tax receipt for that year. So it makes it very convenient for them. And then they gift anywhere throughout the United States to charities that matter most to them. And as Kyle said, we help with that due diligence and we can provide information on those charities to the donor.
And one parting thought for me is we talked a lot about Hudson Community Foundation's staffs and the important advantages that those have in charitable. But don't overlook the general fund either. Hudson Community Foundation, has a general discretionary pot of money that they use to better the community in flexible ways. So, and they'll take applications for. Well, Amy, I can let you talk a little bit more about it. But I think that's an important thing if you value the Hudson community. Don't overlook the general fund.
Yes, and thank you for that. Also on the subject of the QCDs, because at HCF being a public charity, they can receive that gift, but you can also direct that gift to us onto an area that matters most to you. And we'd be glad to work with you on that gift that does go into our unrestricted bucket. That's the Hudson Now Fund, or as Nick has mentioned, our endowment is Hudson Forever, so that we can continue to meet the needs of the community in the future. I think we're about at time though, unless each of you have another comment, but I would like to say in closing, we have had an opportunity to hear from 4 professionals, each bringing their unique perspective and experience on the topic of financial planning, estate planning, philanthropy, and building a charitable legacy with your family. And thank you to all that have joined us today. And hopefully you found this discussion beneficial. Again, as a reminder for those advisors in the chat, there is a short survey for you to complete to receive your credit. And remember just to include your name and CFP ID. The slide that you see on your screen right now has everyone's contact information for our panelists. If you didn't get a chance to grab that information, reach out to me and I'd be glad to send it to you. I'd like to thank Manning and Napier for partnering with us today to bring you this webinar. And thank you, of course, to our panelists for sharing their time and expertise. And gentlemen, if you don't have any further comments, I'll let them know. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All set. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And if anyone has any questions, always feel free to reach out to us at Manning and Peer. Amy Jordan, I know, is more than ready to take your calls, as well as I'm sure Matt and Tom are as well. So happy to help in any way that we can. Thank you for your time today. You have a wonderful weekend if we don't speak with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Kyle.